Hello all, Ashley Kahn here with a very special guest who I'm about to introduce, who's here for the 11th time at Monterey Jazz Festival. Please welcome Herbie Hancock.
Thank you.
I'm going to start just by saying that I realize you guys have a choice of where to be on this beautiful Saturday afternoon at the 60th Monterey Jazz Festival. You made the right choice. This is not only the 60th anniversary of the festival, but there are a bunch of new things happening. This used to be the Jazz Cafe, or the coffee shop. Mm-hmm. It is now the Pacific Jazz Cafe. That's a new thing that is part of the Monterey Jazz Festival commitment to doing these wonderful speaking talk events where the information, the history that is behind the music is shared with you guys so that you have one more doorway into the music and have a way of connecting with it. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Tim Jackson, Timothy Orr, the staff here at Pacific Jazz Cafe for putting this all together. Thank you all. For the next hour, we're going to be talking with a man who's known as a band leader, keyboardist, futurist, visionary, author, and actor. And I thought we would open with a little evidence of that last role, if that's okay with everyone.
Yes. Where's that? Oh.
And here we go.
I'm in the way.
Touchdown on Kieran in 2 minutes.
Minister online.
Sir?
Agents Valerian and Laureline, I trust you studied the assignment. So as soon as you land, recover the converter and bring it to Alpha for a top secret operation. The converter is the last creature of its species, so we're counting on you.
Yes, sir.
Captain Gibson has further details. And please, put on some more appropriate clothing.
Good idea. Leaving manual.
Manual disarm.
Oh, no. Is that what you tell the band before you go on stage? About
Absolutely.
appropriate clothing, please. Tell us about this, because this is such an unusual side career move. How did it come together? Valerian, of course, is Luc Besson's new sci-fi thriller. It's been out this summer, and you're in it. You're the Minister of Defense.
Minister of Defense, right. Actually, what happened was Luc Besson's people contacted my people, and what he wound up actually coming to my house, and I had no idea that there would be any conversation about me being in one of his films. I had no idea. I figured he had something in mind. You know, why was he coming to my house? I'd never met him before. I had watched several of his films, maybe 5 of them, you know, from The Big Blue and The Professional and Lucy I'd seen, and
Fifth Element.
Fifth Element, and, you know, probably 1 or 2 other ones. And, I mean, he's one of my favorite directors. And so he came, we just started talking, and he told me that when he was 14 years old, his uncle, who was a big jazz fan, gave him a record. And it was my record, Man-Child. And he said that no, sorry, let me straighten that out. His uncle didn't give him the record. His uncle used to give him records to check out, right? But he was at a record store, and saw the cover for the record. It just looked interesting to him, so he put it on. You know, in those days you could do that, and he listened to it, and it didn't sound like anything else he had heard before. But he said he was kind of a strange kid. He was like the oddball kind of kid. Some of us are, right? And he liked it, and he didn't know why, but he really, it meant something to him. And he also told me that he didn't have a record player in his house. His father didn't permit them to have a record player. But his uncle had one, and a lot of his friends did. So he would carry this man-child record with him. And when his friends would have like a party or something, he would take the record to the party and say, "Can I play this?" You know, sometimes they would say, "Sure." He put it on, and they go, "Huh?" You know, I mean, they weren't listening to anything like that at all. And that just made them think he was weirder. But he really cherished that record. And he told me that he told me that my music changed his life. That's what he said. That's what Luc Besson said to me. And I'm looking at him like, what? I mean, I've been watching his movies for years. How could I ever, what do I do with that? You know, it was so moving to me to hear that. It was hard for me to really take it in. I mean, it still is. It just sounds too strange to me, you know, that someone who I knew from his creative output, I had finding out for the first time I had that kind of effect on him. And he said the fact that I was an electrical engineering major in school, he knew that before I changed my major to music composition. By the way, that happened in 1958 when I was in college, and I was in the second half of my second year, and that's when I changed. That was the fork in the road where I decided that I was going to do music come hell or high water. That was
it's interesting that's
the same year that the Monterey Jazz Festival started.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for making that decision.
Oh. I'll tell you one thing. I didn't make the decision.
Yeah.
It was already made. I just had to face it, you know, because I was spending more time trying to find out more about jazz than I was trying to find out about physics. You know, although I loved physics and I, you know, loved math, and I still do, and I'm a real techie. It's hard to find someone that's more techie than I am, who is not actually in that business. And but that was like a major turning point in my life, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know,
I was going to take. Okay. The reason I mentioned that is because Luc Besson said that he also uses kind of a mathematical thinking that's attached to math and maybe scientific concepts in actually creating the movies that he makes and the decisions he makes about what the cameras are going to be doing, the angles for the cameras, the choices for editing, and a lot of other aspects of how he makes a film.
There's his whole technical aspect is very revolutionary as well, along with the creative side. You know, I was going to mention that for Miles, same thing. It was exactly 3 semesters into Juilliard when he made his decision to leave school, actually, and turn, 52nd Street and Harlem, etc., into his, that was going to be school for him with Charlie Parker, etc.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's true.
Yeah, you've got good company. The other thing I want to focus on is that it's just been an amazing couple of years for you, just in the past 2-3 years, because of the film, the fact that you have a website that is instructional, where you're putting up, master classes in your approach to music, and you brought out your autobiography, Possibilities. And thank you for that. I mean, the book is amazing. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so inspiring with the kind of stories that you're describing, these pivotal moments in your life.
Yeah, I've had an amazing life, I tell you. I mean, strange things just kind of appeared out of nowhere that were, life-changing experiences for me. And I'm really happy about the way things have gone. And I would say that in anybody's life, there are certain incidents that have happened to you. Some of them appeared to be or had negative elements about them. That could be a death, or that extreme, or some kind of separation from family. I'm just coming up with things that can be major in a person's life. But further on down the line, you could say, I wouldn't be here if I had not experienced these things in the past. And that's one of the things that makes life worth living. And to look at life in that way, to look for how can I use this to move forward. That's an important thing for human beings to be able to take on and hopefully work toward mastering it. Because the only way you're going to actually move forward is to win battles against these many times negative things that occur in front of you. And the battle actually is the winning a battle against your own negativity, your own lack of courage, your own lack of wisdom. And so your biggest enemy is your own fundamental darkness. But you have your fundamental enlightenment too. You have to create that.
The book is wonderful in how it attempts to describe the indescribable and teach the unteachable, in the way that the lessons are not they're almost anti-lessons, like how Miles was a teacher to you, etc. Can you, one of the most important anti-lessons is the idea of him talking to you about what you heard as butter notes, but he could have been talking about bottom notes. But in his rasp, you kind of unheard it, but it had such an amazing effect on you.
Absolutely, you never know.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I remember playing at Lenny's on the Turnpike in Boston with Miles. The club doesn't exist anymore, but we were on stage, and I was just in this kind of depressed mood where I felt like I was playing the same things, the same kind of solo over and over again, and that I wasn't moving forward, and I was just down. And on one of the tunes, when it was time for me to take my solo, I think Miles could hear that, it was kind of listless, and that was because I just was not feeling good about what I was doing. And so Miles leaned over to me with that raspy voice. And I thought what I heard was, "Don't play the butter notes." In his book, he said, or somebody's book about him, claims that Miles said, "Don't play the bottom notes," which reminds me of when he asked me on one of our recordings, he said, "Don't use your left hand." So I forgot which record it was.
Miles Smiles.
Miles Smiles, yeah.
Miles Smiles. Yeah.
And so I said, okay. And I said, okay, yeah. Let me do that. It took me at least a year or more, probably more than a year, to figure out why Miles suggested that to me. He didn't tell me what to play. He made that suggestion because he knew that my left hand was preventing my right hand from expanding. I was kind of leaning on my left hand in a way. I don't mean making it louder, but leaning on what my left hand was doing. And it kept me confined to a certain way of playing. And Miles made that suggestion to let go of the left hand, because then you'll only hear one note in the right hand, not confined to whatever that chord is with that voicing in my left hand. And it worked. It worked. So Miles was that kind of person. So playing "Don't Play the Bottom Note," he might have been, again, making a reference to that left hand thing that...
to the root of the chord, I guess that's what the bottom note would
it's,
be.
well, I wasn't playing, no. That's a whole other story.
Right.
My hands are small. Yes, my hands are small. They are.
The truth can be told. Right.
I don't care if you like it or not.
It's what you do.
Yeah, I know how to use them. You can take that any way you want. Okay, so enough of those kind of jokes. Okay. Anyway, so I don't usually play the root notes with my left hand anyway, because I could never stretch a tenth. For piano players, you know what a tenth is, right? Oh, well, I can show you later, but for those who aren't piano players. And so I figured out, well, the bass player's playing that bottom note anyway, so maybe I can play the upper notes. And I've always played like that. Even though I heard a lot of piano players who would play the roots and the bottom. But it left, since I played the other notes, it left my right hand to find other notes that my left hand, newly refined left hand, it gave me some other notes to do with that. So it wasn't exactly what you described. He wasn't asking me not to play the roots. He was just suggesting even the voicings that I used with my left hand, that was still confining me to a certain direction with my right hand. But since what I thought he says is "don't play the butter notes," what the heck does he mean by that? And so I started thinking, butter, what is that? Butter makes fat, right? Excess, I started thinking excess, you know. And then I started thinking, excess, maybe that's obvious, because, you know. So I started thinking, what are the obvious notes? And again, I have to say something musical in here. It has to do with the structure of a chord. I mean, I can. Oh, okay. Let's see. Is that Michael? Oh. All right. So, okay, by the way, 10th is this. Yeah, I can play it with one hand, with my left hand. So. Now, I'd start thinking about harmony. You know, what are the most obvious notes to a chord, right? Basic chord. And the most obvious note is the third. That's that one. And the reason it's obvious is because it tells you whether it's a major chord or a minor chord. That makes sense to anybody who's not a musician? Okay. Well, that's like the sad chord, and that's the happy chord. Does that help?
Basic music harmony here.
Right.
101.
But if you don't have that note in there, you got. So that could be any number of things. Now, in jazz, we also play sevenths. Now, there's the, that's called a dominant seventh, and that's called a major seventh, or in basic chord. Major seventh, dominant seventh. Now, the dominant seventh goes somewhere, usually, which is. Okay. Now, the major seventh actually is already kind of at home. You know, if you go. So it's home with that seventh. Now if you want. If we go there, maybe, right? Okay, so dominant seventh leads somewhere, and a major seventh, and this is a very simple terms because there are exceptions. This is not like a rule, but dominant seventh is already like comfortable there. I mean, a major seventh. Okay, so the seventh determines something very important, and so does the third. So what does that leave? That leaves what's called a tonic and the fifth. Those two notes. Now, if you're not playing the third and the seventh, gives you a whole bunch of other things that you can put on top of that. You can do that. You can do it. You can do it. Right? You do that? Right? You can do that too. Yeah, and if you look at all the different things that are there. So it just meant that there were a lot more things I could do if I left out the third and the seventh. So I started playing chords like, you know, and other things that left out the third and the seventh. You know. And it really freed me up to hear in a completely different way than what was kind of traditional at the time. So that was kind of a life-changing thing for me musically. So anyway.
Thank you for that. So there's increased harmonic flexibility, freedom, etc., which is what Miles was all about, anyway.
Exactly. The other thing that kind of added to that experience with Miles was when I was first, when I started doing movie scores. doing a movie score is not like making a record. You know, you make a record, it's your record, you're kind of the boss in a way, and it's your vision. I found out the hard way with my first film score, was a film called Blow Up that Michelangelo Antonioni directed. We have great film, and they talk about the film in a lot of film schools. They study it, actually. But that's the director's film. It's his dream, and as the composer, your responsibility is to help the director realize his dream. But in doing that, you can actually realize your own dream. That's the direction to look toward in doing a film score. So what I learned in the process of doing film scores is that because there's dialogue going on, there's visuals, there's all kinds of things going on. In order to satisfy what the director wants the audience to see or to what should draw their attention, that's a good idea. You sometimes less is more, and you don't want to get in the way of something that's already on the film, something that's happening either with the dialogue or certain gesture that the actor may be making, or facial expression that's really strong that the director wants the audience to see. And if it's already on the film, you want to stay out of the way of that. So if you're writing something that's really strong that you would need for perhaps for a record, that would actually overload that emotion. And so it means sometimes really simple things with one line or two counter lines going on could be perfect for that. So that coincides kind of with what Miles said. And so I began to use kind of a cinematic approach to accompanying with, instead of just playing chords all the time to accompany another soloist, I started doing like sometimes a counter line or something that maybe in my head I heard, this is what the flutes might do, or this is what the cellos might do. I started doing that. And that also changed the way I accompany other artists.
That's great. Cinematic is definitely a way that Miles's music has been described very often, with the subtlety and the sort of soundscape, the painting that he's affected.
And Miles became a painter too, you know?
It all works together.
Yeah. So the idea of like colors, it's very important way kind of to look at music when you're involved with creating music.
One of the other aspects of Herbie's autobiography that I love is there's an honesty to it. There's humility, and in some of the stories, such as Tony Williams, who's 6 years your junior, when you guys were in the quintet together, you give him credit for actually getting you away from being a music snob. And can you tell us about that and what that led you to, and how Tony helped open that door for you?
Actually, that particular reference you're mentioning, Tony's input into that was the fact that, well, when I met Tony, he was 16 years old. It was 1962, I was 22, and it was around October, I think, somewhere, almost this time of year, in Boston. And I was in Boston to play with Eric Dolphy, which was the first time I played with a musician who was considered to be an avant-gardist. And I was sort of more bebop-ish, but kind of post-bebop, bebop musician. But I hadn't really delved into the avant-garde until I got with Eric. Anyway, so there was a club called Connolly's in Boston, and there was a banner on there that said, next week, Jackie McLean with, I think, Eddie Kahn on bass and little Tony Williams on drums. And anyway, I didn't know who he was, and so I didn't pay that much attention to it, but I knew Jackie. And somebody during that week that we played at Connolly's, after we were there, maybe the first night, asked me if I'd ever heard this kid, Tony Williams, play. And I said no, and they said, you should meet him. Anyway, I met him that week, and I still didn't hear him play. He was a nice kid. And the next year, around February, I got a call. Of course, I exchanged numbers with Tony, right? So he called me. He said, "Hey, Herbie, this is Tony Williams. I just moved to New York from Boston, and hey man, what's happening?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember you. How you doing?" Meanwhile, well, if it was today, I'd be looking at my iPhone and getting ready to text somebody else, right? So, but I'm listening to him, but I'm not really paying that much attention. I'm thinking, okay, I'll be glad when I get this kid off my phone, right? But I was nice to him, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'll call. I'll call you. And hung up, and I didn't think anything of it. Well, a couple of weeks later, I got a call from Jackie McLean. He said, I got a gig in Brooklyn at the Blue Coronet, and I'd like you to play the gig. I said, cool. Who else is in the group? And I think he did say Eddie Kahn, and he said Tony Williams on drums. I said, Tony Williams, that little kid from Boston?
Who just moved to New York?
Yeah, who just moved to New York. Right, exactly. And I said, Jackie, tell me, is he just really a real good drummer for being 17? By the way, he was 17 by then. So he's a really good drummer for being 17, or can he really play the drums? So Jackie said, Herbie, why don't you make the gig and find out for yourself? I went, okay, it's like a challenge. So we get to the gig, there's no rehearsal, we discuss which tunes, like the standard, something from the standard repertoire of jazz musicians, and I knew the tunes, we all knew. So the first tune that Jackie kicked off was one that starts with a 4-bar drum solo, right? For the intro. So Jackie counts it off. And Tony plays that 4-bar drum intro. And he was like on this side of me. And I'm getting ready to come in. And he starts. I turned around listening to what I'd never, ever heard before or anything like it. And I was flabbergasted. And then when I was supposed to come in, I didn't come in. I was still flabbergasted. I couldn't believe what I heard. And somewhere along the way, I finally started to play. And then for the rest of the night, I was following him. And I was so fascinated by what he did that I almost couldn't sleep that night. And the next morning, and I'm not really a morning person, but next morning I couldn't wait to call him, and I dialed Tony's number, and I said, "Hey, Tony, this is Herbie. Hey, man, what's happening?" Yep. So that changed my life, I'll tell you that. So anyway, to answer your I thought they might want to hear that.
Yeah,
because that's the truth. So because Tony was born in either 1945 or 1946, and I was born in 1940. I mean, he was really a baby boomer, and I'm like 5 years earlier than that. Baby boomers, I think, started in 1945. You know, at that time.
After World War II.
After World War II.
Yeah.
Right. Roosevelt was president when I was born.
Right.
So shows you how old I am. Anyway.
Franklin.
Yeah, Franklin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so.
I better specify which one. Anyway, so when the rock and roll scene happened, let's say Beatles, I think, came here in '64.
Right.
Right? Okay, I was 24. You know, and Tony was 18. You know, so, I mean, that was his generation. It wasn't mine. Right? And so I wasn't really into rock and roll. You know? Later on, and by the way, I had tunnel vision about jazz and classical music. That was it for me. You know, so I was in that box. But I noticed that when I go to Miles's house to maybe hang out or sometimes have dinner, because Miles was a great cook, right? I would notice that there'd be some album jackets there, and there might be Rolling Stones or Janis Joplin, or, you know. Anyway, I noticed that Miles evidently was listening to everything. So I said, wow, Miles must be really open about music. And I have to tell you, Miles, to me, was the epitome of cool. So if Miles was open, it must be cool to be open. So it was really Miles that made that change for me. But because Tony Williams was already listening to, and also they were listening to him. You know, groups like Cream, you know, he listened to them, but they were listening to Tony. You know, and Jimi Hendrix, drummer, was listening to Tony. He would always come to the Vanguard when we were playing to hear Tony, right? So Tony wasn't limited by this box. And then I started listening more to James Brown, you know, because I'm from Chicago, so like the funk thing is part of my roots, right? So when the whole like fusion thing started, because funk, if anything, was kind of the roots of my milieu. I wanted to make kind of a funk jazz thing rather than a rock jazz thing. And that's what led to Headhunters.
That's great. Those are some great stories. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I'm going to get into a sort of hypothetical warp drive here and shoot into just last night, because the ultimate example of Tony and Miles's influence on you to think openly about music led to a moment like this. you know. That was just last night with Lionel Lueke, Vinny on drums, James on bass, James Genus, and of course Terrace Martin on keys and alto sax. And you on the keytar.
Yeah, Terrace Martin.
Terrace Martin, right? Yeah. Did I? Oh, okay, yeah. Terrace Martin on keys and alto sax.
Oh, right.
Right. And some jumping going on by the end of last night's set. That was an amazing set. Was everybody there? I hope you all enjoyed that.
Thank you.
You know, I've been fortunate to catch you about a half dozen times through the summer and up till now at other festivals, and watching this, what seems like a virtual workshop happening as you are incorporating other influences. Terrace Martin is the ultimate example, I guess, coming from contemporary hip-hop as well as contemporary jazz and funk jazz, which you yourself helped create. You know, you laid the foundation for that. Can you talk about how, you know, this openness continues to feed this kind of experimental, you know, kind of approach to music that you're doing with this quintet?
Well, what I discovered for myself was being open should not be confined to playing music. Being open is what we should strive for as human beings. And if I want to promote something, that's one of the things I want to promote, is being open and to realize that people from two different cultures or two different ethnicities or two different parts of the world or two different whatever it may be. I mean, there's several areas we could talk about, generations, so forth. Okay. If they're brought together to produce a piece of music, each one brings something to the table. And what can be a result of that is something that neither could do by themselves. So that's 1 + 1 = 3. It's a new kind of math. I think maybe that's quantum computing or something. So it's very important to work toward being able to listen outside of just listening to yourself. You know, listen to other people. And by listening, it just means being present and paying attention without being judgmental. It's difficult to be non-judgmental, so it's something we all have to really work at. And there are times when it's proper to be judgmental. And I found that out with drugs, right? And so if something's going to harm you, of course you have to judge that. But when it comes to other human beings, there's no such thing as some people that are good guys, and some people that are bad guys. I don't believe in that. If you want to look at the bad guy, look in the mirror. If you want to look at the good guy, look in the mirror. We all have both. And it drives me up the wall when I hear people say something about those bad guys, because it can be so easily misinterpreted. And I think it has been misinterpreted, and that idea leads people in the completely wrong direction. You know, so I guess I'm a Buddhist, and that's my Buddhism coming out. But we believe that humanity is deserving of respect. And that merely means paying attention. You know, people who may be exhibiting their negative side doesn't mean that they don't have a positive side. How you treat them can very often, and probably more often than not, stimulate the good side coming out. And the same can be said of yours. Somebody that treats you with respect more often will kind of trigger your good side coming out too. So that's something really important to remember, and because it pertains to our own personal behavior. That's a difficult thing to master, because very often we live a life that's more about, oh, we're getting away from music. I'm giving you life lessons. I apologize.
No apology necessary. It's all one. It's all one.
But you were asking me about the music, and so I apply that to music. You know, that kind of viewpoint. And so I listen to what other people are playing, and I don't judge what they're playing. But jazz basically is like that. Jazz is basically non-judgmental. So jazz is a lot more Buddhist than the musicians realize. I mean, it really has those attributes of being non-judgmental, about listening and about sharing, because that's really what it's about. I'm not saying other religions don't have that, but I know more about the thing I do. Anyway, in practicing those kinds of ethics, it means that what shapes the band that we have now is not just my own personal vision, but it has to do with also how I look at the world, but also the input from the musicians that I'm playing with. So it's really a shared vision. And that works for me, and it seems to really work for the musicians I play with.
It certainly worked last night. Thank you again for that.
Thank you. By the way, every one of those guys can play. There's no mistake about that, and believe me, I have a hard time keeping up with Vinny Colaiuta. I have a hard time keeping up with Lionel. By the way, it's because he's born in Benin, Africa, right? Which the language that connects, because there are a lot of languages spoken in Benin because it was colonized by a lot of different people at different times, but the language that connects them is French. So his name is Lionel, not Lionel.
Right.
You know, just for your information. Anyway, so I mean, I have a hard time keeping up with Lionel, you know, and James Genus. I mean, the bass lines he plays. I mean, I have to look to see what he's doing as well as listen to see what he's doing, because I want to make sure, you know, where it is. And Terrace has this great ability, and I see it coming from this strength he has for producing, that he seems to sense what's needed. And so he listens a lot and waits, leaves a lot of space, and then he will bring something in because he feels that it's appropriate at that time, but he's not stuck trying to fill everything in, which is great for this band. And he plays keyboards, and he's vocoder, and does vocoder, and he also plays alto saxophone, so it covers a lot of territory.
You know, the inevitable question is that there was going to be a recording of this group coming out around spring of this year, but it's wonderful that it seems like you're taking your time. You're waiting for that recipe to reach that point when it's ready to serve. And that's the feeling I got from catching the music this summer up until now.
Right. I mean, it's taken me a long time to do this record. You should see the list of people that I actually want to have on the record. It's a pretty big list. And I haven't even gotten to the singers. And I gotten to one of the rap artists put something on it already. I can't put all those people on stage, although Kamasi Washington put 47 people on the stage of the Hollywood Bowl a couple of weeks ago. and he was like the opening act, and our little quintet was the main act, and it was like this huge army of people, right? And we got this 5 little guys. But the music was gorgeous that they did. It felt like a celebration of life, and I could see it as an artist who has a big pen with a lot of bristles, doing broad strokes. You know, his record, epic. That's the title of his record, and it had that feeling, that sound, and it was really of kind of a new sense of today's difficult to pigeonhole genre, but absolutely jazz-based. And he was covering that territory. It was just great, and it was joyous and diverse in so many different ways, with people from different countries, different ethnicities. There were a lot of women playing too, which is great. I hope, and I said this at the gala the other day, I hope there'll be a day really soon where we don't have to say anything about women being in certain, being in jazz, where it's just as common as men being in jazz. Yeah, and I have to say, we men have been at fault. We kind of dropped the ball, but we're trying to be a force to change all that now. I hope we are anyway. But anyway, I forgot my point. I've pretty much. I think you kind of know where I was going. What was I saying before?
About the fact that you're waiting until the music comes
Oh,
together,
yeah, right.
and you
Oh,
have
yeah,
this
yeah,
long
thanks.
list of artists, etc.
Right, I lost my way. Okay. So, getting back to the record, right, that's where I started from. Since I haven't put all of those people on the record, and I only have, for this touring season, the gigs for the quintet, and for some gigs it's going to be a quartet. What we're doing live is using some elements of tunes that they're like trailers, kind of, with the set that we're playing. So there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, some fragment of something I did many years ago. And so in a way it's kind of cinematic, because they're like scenes, moving from one to the other. Sometimes we interrupt something that's going on, because Miles used to do that. Before we finished the tune, he would interrupt it with playing the next tune. He didn't tell us he was going to interrupt us. He would just start playing it. And when we were putting this record together, I happened to mention that. We said, okay, let's do that. So we constructed some elements of our live set to do that. And then bring in like the main 4 bars of Butterfly, for example. And then we move on to something else. So one of the things, I'll just say this for right now. One of the things I want to do with this record is dispense with a feeling of having to use the standard song format and create something that's not confined to having what we call AABA, or, a verse, second verse, a chorus, and then a last verse. Or, there are different ways to do that format. But we want to make it more like there's a story that's being told. and it moves from this to that, and it might be interrupted because I mean sometimes in life things get interrupted. You know, so we're gonna make it almost like a living story, and that's what we're trying to do live with it. So that aspect of the record is with this present group that I have, and we've been touring now with this concept for 2 months now, and we're fine-tuning it.
Do you have a name yet for the title yet for the album, or is that going to be?
I actually have had the title for the album for almost a year, but you're not going to hear that today.
Oh, okay.
There'll be a time when I want to actually say
when the time is right.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not yet.
We're almost out of time, but we do have a microphone here for any questions from the audience. It's over here to our right, your left. And please make it short. Make it a question, too. Thank you.
Just wanted to say you're an incredible musician, and
Thank you.
loved everything you do. Now, I have just one quick question. There's a video circulating around, and it's I watched it a couple times. It's pretty interesting. It was from 1964. You were on tour with Miles and Ron Carter and everybody else in the quintet. Now, there's a particular part in the song. I believe you guys were playing Joshua, if I'm not mistaken. And Miles plays the end of a phrase, and you repeat it back to him. And I'm just curious to know, he kind of gave you a very scornful kind of look. I'm not sure if you remember that, but I was just curious to know, like, was he just tired? Was it just a long tour? And then also later when Wayne is taking his solo, he actually comes up to you as you're playing, and he's, like, talking in your ears. I'm kind of curious, do you happen to remember what he was speaking about or talking to you about during the...
I don't remember what he was speaking about,
ago, yeah.
and I don't remember the scornful look. But sometimes Miles might look scornful, but it's more like kind of surprised, and it may not be scorn. So I'm actually not sure. But I know the video you're talking about, and I don't remember what he actually said to me. He might have said, "Did you check my shoes out?"
Greetings from Hyde Park in Chicago.
Oh,
First of all, brother.
Hyde Parker, are you?
That's
Okay.
right. You've always taken chances with your music. I know this. And you started working with Fode Musa Suso. I can't remember the year exactly. This was some remarkable music.
Thank you.
How did you get together with Fode Musa Suso?
Yeah, that was right after Rocket, so it was probably 83 and 84 when I worked with Fode Musa Suso. He's a kora player, right, from the Gambia. And I met him through Bill Laswell, great genius record producer and bass player. And we incorporated him into the Rocket Band because of one song that actually we did that was, it just popped into my mind. That was it was some celebration for America, I remember. And I don't remember what it was, but somebody was putting out a record with different artists on different tracks that would submit something for this. And so this one track had, thanks to Bill Laswell, Fode Musa Suso on it. So that's when I met him, putting that track together. And I liked what he was doing so much that we started trying to incorporate him in other things that the Rocket Band would play. And I also did a record called, I think it was called Jazz Africa, with Fode Musa Suso. And it was a great joy to be working with him. And I learned a lot, really a lot from that relationship with Suso.
Nice question. Thank you.
I'd like to go back to some of your earlier years, if I could. I worked for a long time at Grinnell College, and so I'm interested to know with whom you studied there and what influence this little college had on you.
At Grinnell?
At Grinnell.
Okay, we're talking about between 1956 and 1960, right? And you're asking me for the names of the teachers.
And your grade average.
All right, okay, so that was 58 years ago, right? I don't remember. I'd have to see their name and I go, oh, yeah, I studied with them. But just think of it now. Part of it is because when you're 77 years old, it's hard to remember every little aspect of what happened, like what I said 2 minutes ago. You know, so if something occurs to me, I'll shout it out and say, oh, yeah.
But you remember the
Is there a name that you actually know? Norman Goodroad. Actually, that's what I was trying to think of, and I couldn't think of his name. Yeah, he's the main person that I studied with. I'm sorry? Grant Dale. He was the physics teacher. Yep, he was my physics teacher. Thank you for remembering the names.
And this is going to be the last question.
Mr. Hancock, what's happening?
How much time do you have for an answer to that?
Right. I would like to know, well, all of us, of course, have heard the stories of the temperament of Miles Davis. I want to know if you have any story that you can think of where he wasn't so nice that you remember, that you can tell us about, maybe some story.
Something that wasn't so nice you want? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I didn't always agree with the degree of difficulty Miles might present to someone who's kind of innocent of perhaps some aspect of their life. Let me explain this. I'm sorry, I can't answer this in one sentence, but I remember Miles saying to me something about don't co-sign something that's being said, right? And what he meant by that is if somebody's saying something, you don't have to clean it up for them. And I used to do that. I would try to clean things up for Miles, try to explain why Miles said this to someone that might have been harsh, you know, because I didn't want them to misunderstand what Miles was saying or what he was trying to do. A lot of times Miles would say things to kind of wake people up, and it got misinterpreted. It got misinterpreted that he was racist, or that he was or that he hated the audience, or that he, you know, like turned his back on the audience, and I have easy explanations for a lot of those things. You know, if Miles was turning his back to the audience, who was he facing?
The band.
You ever heard of a conductor that doesn't face the orchestra? Did anybody complain about any classical conductor turning his back to the audience? Well, it's just because you're not used to seeing jazz musicians not face the audience. But truly, Miles was actually facing members of the band and having conversations with them. Or sometimes he would point his horn at the floor because it had a different sound. Miles cared more for what he was going to present to the audience than anybody that I ever met. So take that home with you, right?
Thanks.
Yeah. but he was sometimes harsh when he would say something that would really be a lesson to somebody else if they really thought about it, took it home, and started to really ponder it. And I would immediately like hear what he said, and I go, and try to explain to the person. But after a while, after hearing about co-signing, I would go, just, so I wouldn't say anything. And I learned that it was arrogant of me to assume that I knew the right thing to do. And it was actually my ignorance. And so that taught me something else. Miles taught me another thing about how to be a better person, with that.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Herbie Hancock, thank you for sharing all these memories and lessons with us today. Don't forget tomorrow night with Chick Corea at the main stage.